So in our last clip, we had this rather interesting look and description into the character and appearance, as well as work ethic of the men and women who settled in Tennessee from a source, although it be primary, is the author is unknown. But he was the gentleman we talked about in the last clip who stayed at the Montville Springs Hotel just outside of Maryville in the 1840s. And of course, that gives us a pretty good insight as to the will and the temperament, as well as, in some cases, the work ethic. I think he might have had a bit of a biased opinion because he was an out-of-towner, possibly out of state. But nonetheless, he does hit on quite a few things that are absolutely right. And now, it should be mentioned that a few of the things he fails to describe in his depiction of these settlers is that, similar to what Benjamin Franklin talks about in his memoirs from the 1790s, the first frontiersmen come out, they go ahead, they kill the trees by cutting them at least about 2 or 3 feet off the ground, and then they start to build a cabin, next to that an adjoining shelter, which afforded shelter to a good pair of horses and a cow, and that's pretty much it, the way he describes it. Now, some people could make do with a lot less, and they would initially live in a shelter like that just long enough to go ahead and get your crops planted and get yourself out of the elements, as well as provide a little protection from any hostile natives that might be about. But after this had been done, the clearing of the trees, the building of the shelters, what comes next for the fledgling farmstead? Well, as one would rationally and rightfully guess, the next thing to do is to go ahead and remove all the stumps, thus clearing the fields and prepare them for plowing. And as previously mentioned in that depiction, corn was one of the primary crops to be grown at this time. And we do have some primary sources here which kind of give us insight to that. The first of which is from the 1782 letters from an American farmer, in which it states that corn is the principal crop. Without it, the people would starve or move on. Wow, that says a lot about just how valuable corn was. But it goes on here that even David Crockett himself states in his autobiography from 1834, we depended on the game of the country and of the wild fruits as much as our corn patches. So corn is king. Corn is one of the main crops that is being grown, but it should never be mistaken that that was the only crop being grown. That's how you starve to death. So what a lot of the crops being grown at this time by people were typically root crops and very hardy fare, things like cabbages, potatoes, onions. And that would typically tend to give them a greater yield in their harvest, and also those foods could be stored away for long periods of time, ensuring that they would be able to have food stored away for the winter. But also interestingly, there is a method that most people think was just done by the Native Americans, but that's not the case, because when the European settlers first started coming to these shores and they learned how to cultivate the soil and farm from the Native Americans, they learned how to grow what was called the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash, which interestingly enough grows symbiotically, and therefore they provide a greater yield of 3 produce items that does not require nowhere near as much field or pasturage in regards to, as opposed to growing all sorts of different things and having it scattered all over the place. But, of course, we've got to talk a little bit more about the farming and then some of the other food items which might be on the bill of fare in the typical homestead from this time in our next clip.